Log number 39. I'm recording this on the 19th of July, and this is the end of my working week and a recap of what has been happening. This week was supposed to be the sort of the end of the design, the conclusion of all the compositional elements that I introduced in the beginning, and the fruition of all the work that I have done, leaving me with some shadows and lights to be done in the end. It turns out that it wasn't. As soon as I started working on compositions and the compositional sections 10, 9, and 11, I realized that I wanted to slow down. I wanted to take a bit of time, a bit of reflective process on creating, especially section number 10. Section number 10 is a very interesting and unique element that I've introduced in this sixth sort of composition and design of the stonemason's journey. It's a very unique and ambitious sort of design, as I have been explaining since the beginning. I'm going to prompt up the compositional sort of frame that I have been doing, and you're going to see the updated version of where the shaded lines are is where everything is complete. Sort of everything is filled in. It has some sort of shadows and textures done to them, and as soon as I finish section number 10, 9, and 11, I'm going to be able to see all of them together and really blend everything to work as one versus some collage element that usually is the case when you progress something and you need that final sort of shadow and light values to match. So as you can see, section number 10, it's quite high, and it's a triangle within a triangle, really. The reason being is that usually is the composition that I would put the most energy in. As we established, a triangle section is an energy section of the composition, which becomes the focal point or one of the focal points, given that the bigger triangle is the main part, and then the second triangle that is inside is the second section that you would see, and vice versa, and it goes as such. So when you're creating composition and you put the shapes in, you can have a rough idea on how the observer, the viewer, the audience can navigate around the composition, and in what order do you want them to experience it. So section number 10 is a very important one, a very interesting and unique, very surrealistic, if I am honest. And given that it's further in the background versus section number 1, 2, and 3, which are on the foreground, it downsizes in scale, and at the same time it becomes less detailed and more embedded in the shadows that the composition will have, given that the foreground has more light and the background has more shadows to introduce depth. So in this section, given that I wanted to give a lot of emphasis on it, even though it's in the background, the scale became much smaller, which we have established that I have been slowly becoming accustomed to drawing on smaller designs and smaller sections. And it's very challenging for me, given that I came from big, massive paintings and sort of space that I can just create freely without having to restrain myself in detail and in scale. But with the stonemason sort of theme and the size that I've decided to go on it, and the challenge aspect that I wanted to tackle, the scale had to be smaller, and everything had to sort of downsize, and me having to prioritize my blending and the textures that I use to imply the detail that I couldn't really imply in this section that I have. So but this week's sort of working session, I have started working on section number 10, and I went from the beginning and all the measurements were done, and I sort of put them down on paper. It was going well. It's very intricate. It has very different sort of elements that really becomes quite interesting when you see it in the end. So I'm not going to really spoil what I've added onto it, but it was quite small and quite challenging, but it was going sort of according to plan. I was very surprised and at the same time used to this, so I could progress it quite well. And on Wednesday was it? And Wednesday was the final section of composition number 10, and I had to sort of do the final iteration of whatever this shape sort of becomes. And I took it slow, and I decided to slow down, and I took some breaks, changed it a little bit, and concluded it with a decision that I felt quite comfortable and I liked. And the remaining part was to complete the area around it, add the shadows to pop this object out, and then introduce number 9 and 11 to really complete the design. I decided not to finish it, in terms not to push to actually finish all these sections and really take a breather and really take a step back to understand what was happening and how this section 10 added to the composition. Now, given that I haven't completed the background of it, the sort of the glue, let's say, to be combined with the other sections, it has the object and then like a white sort of circle around which I have to add the details and the sort of textures of the objects to really blend everything together to really say if this is something that could be applied or not. And I had to do that, but I decided to, as I said, to really slow down, really take a breather and focus on the measurements, because I had to measure number 9 and 11, and decided to spend Thursday on doing all the remaining measurements. And I did. I succeeded on that. The design's measurements are all finally sort of accounted for, and the only thing that I need to do is to draw them, which is not a lot of measurements. It has a couple of elements that are a bit tricky, and section number 9 to be another sort of challenging idea that touches upon and reflects the difficulties of section number 4, 2, and 10. But I'm quite used to it, and I decided to sort of take a step back, as it's really tolling to work on a small section and to consider all the detail and the amount of work that I had to do. And usually I push myself a lot when it comes to that, and mistakes can be made when you constantly push yourself. And when I feel that in a scenario when I push myself and there's all these fluctuations of emotions of, do I like it, do I not, do I fix this, do I add this, do I take away that, all these different questions, all these different sort of plethora of sides that I would take, it really takes a toll on me. So I decided to really step back and cut this out and say, I've done one section that it was challenging this week, I'm going to do the next section next week. So next week's idea, which is this week basically that you're going to be listening to this log, or whenever you're going to be listening to this, maybe after the completion of the Stonemason journey or whatever. But the idea is that I'm going to be finishing the design the week that you're listening to this, section number 9 and 11. They're not quite difficult in terms of the idea. Is just with this I can finally close everything up and really bring everything together to merge it and make it nice and add the shadow values that I wanted and the details that this design has. Although it is not really a challenging design as some of the other ones in terms of the scope, the whole composition is a very ambitious one. It's a very unique in terms of the execution and what it shows, and how I play with the lighting and I play with the environment and the objects that the stonemason has allowed us to witness after we enter the tower and we see it with our own eyes. And on Friday, today, after I had this sort of satisfactory work week, I decided to clean my studio, clean everything. I always had this idea that when I clean everything up, when I tidy things and make sure that I declutter things, I take things off the shelves, I throw away things that I no longer use, I have like this effect of I feel less burdened and I feel as if I can breathe again. And I realized that when I was in flow and that was necessary. When I needed sort of a refresh, I would take a day off and I would work on this and then really clean my studio, declutter things. So next time I can finally breathe. You will be amazed, and I'm sure that many of you would really atone to this. That as you're focusing on a theme or focusing on a section in your life, things begin to clutter up around you without you even knowing. And it gets to the point where you wish you could just fix it with a snap of your fingers, but then you need that energy to actually do it. And that's why I dedicated a full day to do it. And I did. And everything is clean and nice now, decluttered. And I can move forward with the design and really conclude this properly. I have to say that as I was cleaning though, I found some of my remaining old sketches of flow as I sold most of them. And it got me thinking. It got me thinking of my progress and it got me thinking of where I started, given that that was my first attempt to really create something that has a conclusion versus um, a design that just existed somewhere in the section of my life, and it was sort of open ended. But in flow, it was a real deliberate attempt to allow myself to finish something and work with it and introduce it to others and have that interaction with everyone. And I began sort of reminiscing a little bit of the past and how each of the designs that are left, it was some of them were even before I even started the flow design. It was just the basic structure of how I wanted the waves to appear. And then I had one that was left that was like towards the end when I designed uh, the painting previous to last. So it was number 10 or 11, I can't remember. And I saw how my mind was shifting and how my techniques were changing. And given that it was a drawing, and I'm drawing now, I'm using graphite as I used before. Obviously, now I'm using it in much more advanced techniques and blending methods, given that I'm not going to be painting them. It's going to be based on just graphite. Um, I realized how much my mind has started shifting and myself either changed or grew. It could be both. It's hard to tell, how life sometimes in the end just really throws us many different obstacles and we either change or grow with them or learn with them. And I'm trying to figure that out slowly. And it's been a nice slice of the past being introduced back into my life. I made sure to preserve them, like storage them in a nice way. But it made me think. It made me think how this theme that I'm working on, I would say 90% of the people who have been with me in flow don't even know that this exists. Like they don't even know that I'm working on this. Primarily because I keep everything to myself. I really detach from social media. I don't really know how what my stance is on it in terms of I feel like it really brings me down to really try to attempt to work with social media and myself in terms of my art. I'm notorious that I can only do one thing and one thing only, and I can't really do many things at once. And primarily, I always focus on the practice of my art and the feeling of it and how it makes me behave and how my behavior is reflected in it. And usually, social media has always been a question on how do I show this to people, which their Twitch really took away the guessing, given that I was doing what I was gonna do, and then that was coming with it, given that I was live streaming it. But now having to go out of my way and really post something and having to explain all this meat of information and not really having anything to show specific, given that I really want to finish this and then be able to show things. I'm really sitting down in this uncertainty of how will this be um, break down and understood, given that I don't really have anyone in my life or at the moment who has experienced this stonemason other than the the people who are going to be listening to this, and they're gonna get a glimpse of my words in their own imagination and sort of compiling all this information in their imaginary compositions, which is interesting. It made me think a lot, given that I said that on this arc at least, the isolation has to be there. Given that I I really need to understand where I stand in this, and it feels like I'm not really making any progress in my stance and how I wanna behave in the social aspect. I find it very hard, and I'm sure many of my fellow peers do as well. But they can do it better. I suppose they can do something they don't like. I'm really I've always struggled doing things that I don't like in life. Primarily, maybe because I've made my life so that I don't have any excuses to do things because I just have to. I I do I go through life by doing things that I really want to, and with this attitude, there is a few things positive and many things negative. Um, the few things positive is that it really allows you to live day by day in the manner that you see fit, and if you change along the way, it's great because that would change with you. But the downside is that you don't get the rewards that many of others do by doing things they don't like. Many maybe a stability or the attention that they desire. But I realize that I don't really value that as much. So having to just keep myself for myself sort of attached and accounted for can really just at the end make the difference that I want it to make. I know it's I know for many it's like, oh, you can just share it as you go along and all that. But if you consider this, right? You spend most of your day sitting down with your feelings, your personal state of mind, creating something that is very personally and equivalently your mindset and how you see the world. And it takes a lot of you, right? It takes a lot of yourself, your mental state to really bring yourself to do that. And you do this without wanting something specific in response, rather than just sharing it. At some point, being able to share this perspective, this reality that you've been seeing the world to operate in. And it's great because everyone has their own reality, and having to share this promotes conversations and yada yada. But then you have all these intimate moments, this personalized moment with yourself, and then you're faced with how do I bring this to the world when it's not finished, when it's a promise, right? Like, oh, look at this, I'm gonna do this, and don't just look at it right now, it's gonna be compiled with this, and it's a promise that in my mind warrants a lot of conversation, warrants a lot of questions. And having to think about how would I do this and introduce it to someone who will probably spend 10 seconds on it. Not even that, 3 seconds on it. I just can't, right? I can't narrow down my work that demands time, and it's always been designed that way. The person who's going to give this time is going to get rewarded with something very personalized. And the person who doesn't have the time, it's fine. You can always come back to it when you do. So social media's sort of attention span and how it works doesn't really reward and attract the thing that really is the foundation of my work. And I've been understanding it more and more. And the reason why it worked before with Flow is because of Twitch. And let me elaborate on that. When I was painting, I was talking, and everyone that wanted to join throughout their day, they could easily just put me on the background, see my work, and then see my mentality behind it as I was conversing and elaborating daily how it changed, my intentions, and all the scope of the composition. And then when I was going to post sort of like the few lines of my understanding of that day or that week or that painting, people will have a great understanding of it given that they had the meet prior to this sort of synopsis. And like the 3 seconds that they would interact with it, they would read a couple of lines and then that would reflect my words that they've heard before, and it would make sense to them and it would be engaging. But now having to engage without having that meat, without having that the context that people don't really know, and I don't really make it accessible in the sense that given that my new trajectory on this theme, it creates a disruption. And I know that's very interesting to realize that, and it makes me think a lot. It makes me think where, as I said, where I stand in all this. And I know that maybe in the next arc, when I take my break to really compile the foundation of it and make it a bit more sort of realistic, given that it exists in my head, and when I start putting things on the paper, I begin to realize it and I begin to cultivate it in a realm where everyone can understand it. And if it's not understandable, I'll change it, I'll work with it, and that type of process. And I was thinking that maybe introducing that again, introducing this audiovisual aspect could be a thing. I'm not sure in what way, I'm not sure in what amount either, but I'm certain that I need a balance that I'm not hitting right now, given that I did the extreme before of going fully social, and the other extreme I'm doing now, which is the opposite of being very antisocial, which is very interesting. I quite find informative of who I am and how I operate, because when we narrow down our pool of chatter or pool of conversations from people that maybe know us or maybe just know a part of us, or they don't know us at all, we begin to really see and hear ourselves. And sometimes we don't like that. We don't like ourselves. And we don't like what we're saying or what we're doing or what we're creating. And we can't really blame that on anyone else. Maybe before I could say, oh, it was just too much going on. I couldn't really focus, and I became too tired to continue on this, and all these different excuses, which they are excuses in the end of the day, given that I like to think that whatever I do, which is the concept of my life, is what I want to do, right? It's not really putting up with things. And now that I can't really excuse it or anything, other than just myself being inadequate at some points, or not having the skills or the patience, or seeing the things that I realize I need work on. I begin to work on them without having to dwell on it, or just procrastinate, which is great. It's very difficult given that you're by yourself, and you keep moving forward and you understand yourself in the amount that you allow yourself to be understood, given that many things that we might understand might not be the things that we want to acknowledge. So we try our hardest to just ignore it, just to really just say that that's not us. But at the end of the day, in the amount of repetition that is sort of surfacing, we begin to sort of say, oh wow, I really need to become more humble and understand that not just the things that I like will surface, and that's fine. And I think I've been doing that very subconsciously and sometimes consciously as I'm conversing them and transferring them onto these logs in since the beginning. Since the beginning on how I would treat my artwork, and then how I didn't like how I was treating my artwork, and me relearning things. And from my relearning, I started learning new things actually, and seeing the progress and being surprised and being excited with myself, and having like this sort of unbroken pact with saying that if anything goes wrong, it's okay, we can fix it. We've done it 1,000 times. The only thing that we need to do is always remember to take a breather, slow down when things are looking, the walls are closing in, things are overworked. Slow down and see life first, so you can reflect life in what you're doing. Because usually, when I emphasize and when I sort of get super narrow minded on something in the design, it's very visual. It's like, why is this thing not coming out in a way that I want it to, as the composition demands it to? And usually, it never is the emotional part that is not being depicted, is my unsatisfactory skill cap that I haven't really reached. And it's very superficial. It's very superficial to think like that, because at the end of the day, what was achieved served the composition, but it wasn't serving my visual and my ego as an artist, as a young artist. Given that that I've been quite young in this journey, and I guess there is a pride on showcasing the best of my skills, and it's something that I've observed in Rembrandt's work when I was in the Netherlands, and I saw a couple of his pieces in person. And when I witnessed this, I think it really comes with age. It really comes with the amount of the priority and why you do the things you do. So I think I've talked on this maybe in very early logs, but I'm going to say in a summary of it. In in the museums that I've seen Rembrandt's work, in many of them they will display his most famous work. Famous work being the work that he did for royals, for people who paid handsomely for his commissions, and you could see how delicate and beautiful everything looked, finished off quite nicely. Paint was blended beautifully, the light, everything was just magnificent. And that will really carry on in all his life, that or all his period of life, that he had that going for him. People would pay him handsomely, and he would have to show both his sort of skill and his personality in reflection of his status. And as he grew older, given that some of his final paintings in his life were displayed, you could see he dialed that all down. He didn't really care in making things perfect. He captured the subject, and as soon as he captured it, he just left it there, because that's the beauty of something. That's the only thing that you learn. The stages that you learn in a composition is when you capture this difficulty, this ambition that you see in front of you, and these questions of how do I make this in and reflect this in the way that I witness it. And you get to do that. That's like stage number one, going on to two. And then the other three stages, which is the finalization, is how others will perceive it. How would someone who hasn't really seen what I'm seeing perceive it in a way that it's to the standard of the collective artists that are sort of trailblazing this era. And you could see that he did it in the beginning when he was younger, when he was at his prime, we would say. But then as he was getting older, life becoming more, I wouldn't say a burden, but I would say more real. Death was closer, and all his mortality was sort of much more prevalent. You could see his subjects changed, obviously, because he didn't declined getting work from the royals and people who paid handsomely. He would just paint whatever he wanted, the people on the streets or people that he wouldn't be allowed to before, and then he would capture something that he cared about that individual, and you could see it on his brushstrokes. You could see his impression, what he liked about it, and as soon as he achieved that, he would let it go, which isn't that the point, right? The point is to find what you like in something and then move on to the next one. Not find what you like and bask in its glory and live there forever so that the next person can understand your skills and be like, wow, you're able to do that. Because I think he had that. His skills reached the level that people could understand that, oh, he has his capabilities. Then why continue that? Because that doesn't change. Your capabilities in a finalized picture doesn't really show. The capabilities of you finding what you like in the subject that you're painting or creating is the pinnacle of you being able to understand your reality and really capture it, which I found very fascinating. And is the thing that is in my mind when I'm working on these compositions and in my art in general, because I'm more focused in his earlier life as a young adult as well, in finding this beauty and this completion of something to look magnificent. Even though I can understand, like, well, can I understand? I'm not sure if I can find what I like without finalizing it, which I think it's gonna come with age and with many years in this trade. So it's food for thought that I wanted to share, and it's been on my mind for this week and a couple of weeks now, and yeah, it's been interesting, and I hope what I said made sense so that you can apply it in some way in your mind. But yeah, as a conclusion of this log, I'm gonna be aiming for this week to finalize and finish the design. If not, I'm gonna take a few days of the next week to really conclude this, and I'm really gonna sit down with this and really gonna take my time to create the ending of these 6 compositions that I've been working so tirelessly. Wow. Of course, my English will break at the end of the log, but it's fine. It's reality. People talk like that, and I'm not gonna edit this out. So yeah, thank you for listening, and I'll see you with the reflections of the next week.